All right, recording's out. Welcome back to Thursday Study Hall. We are doing critical reasoning today, defining specific goals. We'll see what that means in the context of the problems that we've got here, but basically the big issue that people have in critical reasoning is that they kind of don't really know what they're talking about. And they start looking at the choices. Yeah, they go into the choices with this sort of half-formed idea of what they want in an answer choice. It doesn't really serve them too well. Here's the copyright notice again. These problems are from the free GMAT prep software, copyright GMAC. So that's where they're from. Okay, let's do a problem. Remember, this is where, when you have a multiple choice problem, this is where you pick your answer from. So not in the chat box, please. So let's do that. Let me put a problem on the board for you, and then we will. Good. Okay. Here's your problem. Remember where multiple choice answers are found. Those are found underneath your name. Right there. Go for it. Okay, let's pick an answer choice. Of some kind, which is giving interesting. Okay, we've got, remember the way this test works, by the way. If you don't, there's no such thing as not answering a question. I mean, you have to answer all the questions, and you have to do it in the order that they've given you the questions. I mean, you get one shot. If you have a staring contest with the question will win that one, then you will lose it. That's what will happen. I mean, you can't not answer the questions, so you might as well just school yourself in that mentality right from the get-go. Okay, so here's, I don't normally post up the group responses, but we have two very favorite answers here at this point. I mean, we have people liking A and we have people liking D. And we have a smattering of responses for the other choices, but it's pretty much it's like pretty bimodal here. So, but okay. So here's the thing, right? What do you think makes these things hard? It's kind of a generic question, but because most of these critical reasoning problems, when you think about it, are things that at some point are things that normal people of perfectly average brain capacity would have like normal conversations about. So, I mean, what do you think it is that makes this hard? There's a lot of words. That's part of it. Part of it is that there are a lot of words, although there are not, an unmanageable number of words. But here, think about that right there. Reversing polarity. I don't I don't know that I know what you mean by that. I think what I think you mean there is that sometimes people accidentally pick answers that do the opposite of what they want. If that's what you mean, then that's a thing that happens. If you mean something else, then I don't know. Wait a minute. So Colleen says this. Let me actually put this on a new page, because this is an interesting idea. The logic is more narrow than we are accustomed to. But is it? But is it really? I mean, this is something that you really want to think about, because if you think about it, what we're accustomed to is very, very narrow. It is actually incredibly narrow. I mean, like if you think about everyday normal conversations that people have, the kind of focus that people have on issues of discussion is actually really incredibly specifically focused. I mean, it depends on what the particular conversation at any point is. Like, for example, let's say that someone is going to go on a diet, okay, and here are two questions that someone might ask, where the first question is this one, and then the second question is this one. So, like, think about the difference between these questions, right? They look similar in words if you see them on a page, but they're like, whoa, so totally different. And the reason is focus, right? Like, one of them is specifically about cause and effect, and one of them isn't, and one of them admits all sorts of other incidental things, and one of them doesn't, right? Like, let's say the person's also like adopting some sort of crazy, workout program at the same time, then that's totally relevant to question 2, but totally irrelevant to question 1. And the thing is that in a totally normal conversation, we would completely realize both of those things, right? If the conversation was, does that diet make people lose weight, then people would dismiss things about working out. They'd be like, that's just not what we're talking about right now, dude. Like, people would realize that. So, whereas if it was about someone who's going to do it and may or may not succeed, then that would also, oh, they're also doing this. Okay. So I would actually challenge this part of what you're saying there, because I think that what we're accustomed to is actually way more focused than what you think it is, at least in any sort of conversation that has a point. I mean, there are some kinds of conversations where there's not really, like the kind of conversation that's not meant to be productive is a different kind of conversation. Like, where you're just sort of staring at the sky and, saying random stuff. And that's different. But any sort of conversation that is meant to be productive is very, very, very focused. And in fact, it probably has much more narrow focus than what you're accustomed to using. Because this is the whole point, right? You know exactly what the conversation is about, and you have this exquisite sense of what is relevant and what isn't relevant. Whereas, like, that's the point with words like this. I mean, words like this are a problem because in normal conversation we don't say words like this. That's the point. Like, we literally do not ever say things like that. I mean, we don't say things like weakened argument or undermine assumption or logically complete. Like, we don't do that. when we talk in terms of specific. Aha. And I mean, even if we say, does it make sense, even if we do that, we still, I mean, we don't do that unless it is clear to everyone what it is and what making sense is. And if it isn't, then people will usually kind of, you know, voice their doubts of that, right? Like if the question is something like, hey, your plan won't work. If someone doesn't know what the plan is, then they'll be like, what plan? I'm lost, right? So, and this is the single most important thing, right? Like this is what you have to do, right? The key to problems like this is to translate all like abstract logic words into specific. Like the guideline you can use here is you can just use the everyday conversation guideline. Like basically, and if you're using words that you would not use in normal talking with normal people, then bad. And I mean, this is, I mean, no offense to the person who wrote this, but this right here is the wrongest thing that I've seen someone write in months, if not years. I mean, the logic of this section is absolutely, totally real-world logic, and that is the whole point of the critical reasoning section. I mean, it is. That's exactly what it is. It's a test of within the confines of being able to test things in a standardized test. It's real-world logic, and if you use formal logic, it will not work and cannot work. So, I mean, because that's actually the point of these problems. The point of these problems is that you do have to use real-world connections that go beyond formal logic and stuff. Like if your reasoning is limited to if A then B, if B then C, therefore if A then C, then it's not going to work. So, and you'll see this enough as we go. So, yeah. But I mean, totally fundamentally depends on real-world connections. I mean, they're not obscure connections. I mean, they're connections that the crowd makes, and this is one of the reasons why they crowdsource the problems. Like, this is one of the biggest reasons why they make them experimental before they make them real problems, is they want to give them to several thousand people and make sure that people make the connections they expect them to. But no, GMAT logic totally is everyday, unremarkable, normal people logic. In fact, that's totally the whole point of it, is that. And it's important to realize that. Okay, so this here. So let's talk about this. The deal is we need to translate what this means into specifics. So let's do that. But I mean, again, it's important to know this. I mean, not to keep coming back and banging on the same idea, but there are a lot of people out there who think this, and people who think this tend to get worse and worse and worse at it the more they study it. Because, you know, this idea that you have to replace your normal intuition with some, like, learned kind of thinking is not true. It's totally off base. And if you think that way, then you will just keep getting worse at this. I mean, at the very most, what you might have to do is take your ordinary intuition and supplement it with a couple of points about certain types of problems and certain limitations and stuff. But if you think you have to get rid of your normal intuition and replacing it with some artificial way of thinking, then you will definitely get worse at this. I mean, that's a guarantee. I mean, you will definitely score lower than you did before ever studying. Because you can't do that. Not think that would work. But like this. Okay, let's talk about specifics here. So, the goal of reading this passage is to know what they want. So, okay, we can plant this, we can plant corn at half the usual spacing. There's not as much yield per plant. but still profits can double. So, okay, let's see what happens. Let's see what the deal is. So we can grow twice as many plants per unit area because of the, we can grow them half as many just parts. But each plant will give less corn. So we can get twice the profit per unit area. Okay, so what is it that we need in terms of specifics? Like what do we want to know? What are we looking for? We're looking for a reason why what? I can grab plants. All right, so Austin is going somewhere with this. That's kind of the next step here. The first step is to just define what it is that we want, right? We want a reason for this. So what do we need, right? A specific goal. So the specific goal is we need a reason why profits will be twice as high, even though yields are not twice as high. So there you go. This is what we need. So there's a couple of things about this, right? Like notice that, I mean, you're just taking what you have in the passage and putting it into a statement. But just stating this in terms of specifics will probably make you realize a lot of things about an answer choice that you need. I mean, the first thing is that it's going to have something to do with profit. And so this is where Austin and Stephen Chen, that's where they're getting with this. Because, I mean, focus is also a thing, right? If they start talking about profits, you shouldn't still only be thinking in terms of numbers of plants and things like that, right? Like, this is just because that's not the only thing that they're talking about. It's basically it. I mean, if they're talking about profits, I mean, this is going to sound very common sense in these terms, but if they're talking about profits, then you need to think about profits. Yeah, sure. If they talk about profits, you need to think about profits. How about that? Okay. Right? Profit is revenue minus cost. I mean, this happens to be the only fact about business that you have to know on this entire exam, by the way, is that profit is revenue minus cost. So, like, literally, this is the only thing that you have to think about business on the entire exam, is that profit is revenue minus cost. So what we need is that we need something that will increase revenue or decrease costs to compensate for the loss of yield. We need something that will increase revenue capture or decrease costs to compensate or to make up for the poorer yields. That's what we need there. This is the thing. So this is like a standard. Notice we haven't even touched the answer choices yet. We haven't looked at them. And this is what you should do in pretty much all of these problems, as much as you can at least, is you should do this. You should make a standard for a correct answer before looking at the choices. Like, these shouldn't be processes of elimination at first. I mean, that's a very bad way of going about this. I mean, if you have to do that as a backup technique, then you can. But at first, you should look for something, and there'll be one choice that does that, and other choices that don't. Like, okay, so here, something that'll be more revenue or less cost to make up for that. So let's take a look in that light. There's a standard. Let's take a look at the choices and see if they do that. All right, so A says, when you put the rows closer together like that, you will spend less on these things that cost stuff. That's good. That's what we want. If you look at this, I mean, B is, I mean, you might have taller plants, but we still know that they're lower yields. I mean, like, if you see B, some people pick B, but the thing is, lower yields are lower yields. I mean, the only reason you might like choice B is if you kind of imagine that taller plants might give you more yield, but the problem is that the words say that they don't. I mean, that's not what the words say. And you still have lower yields. So, per plant. So height is irrelevant. As far as C and E, I mean, C means you've got more cost. So this is bad. And this goes the wrong way. This is the opposite of what you want. You would like to see lower cost. What about D? Number of plants will almost double. So does this explain how you could end up with double profit? I mean, if anything, like when I first read the passage, I kind of just, the default assumption here is that your rows have approximately the same number of plants, right? So you would think that if you can plant 15 inches apart, then you would have exactly twice the number of plants. So this is almost even making that less strong. Because if they're saying this, then this actually means that you wind up with fewer plants in a row. So it certainly doesn't add anything. So that's one problem with this choice, is that it doesn't make anything stronger. I mean, if anything, it makes, like, it either affects nothing or even makes the original weaker. because when you read the original, the default assumption should be that you will have exactly twice as many plants, unless you thought otherwise. So that's one problem there. But the other problem is that profits are exactly twice as big. So if you think about this choice, you have fewer than twice as many plants. Now we know that. Times lower yield per plant than you used to have. So this would absolutely not explain why you have double the profit. Because in fact, both of those components are below where they have to be. Right? They basically told you have less than twice as many plants times less than normal yield per plant. It's going to mean way, way less. It's going to be substantially less than 2 times profit. So, therefore, still unexplained. We still have no idea why it's twice as much profit. So, nope, doesn't explain it. And the reason why, those are the reasons why choice D is wrong. But honestly, you don't even have to go through that much brain work with choice D. You should actually be you should be very suspicious of choice D from the very beginning because of that. Because of that right there. Choice D doesn't even go into the whole notion of profit. Remember one of the main points of this entire thing is they want to make sure that you can focus on goals. And they want to make sure that you understand the focus of a discussion and that you can stay focused on it. This is a thing about profit. So if you pick choice D, you're not even touching the idea of profit, even though that's supposed to be the whole point. So, well, theoretically, yeah, James, but that stuff's already under discussion, right? Like one thing that you'll discover about these problems, if you think about it even a little bit, is that the answer choices introduce new things that are still relevant to the topic, right? So, but they want to make sure that you know what goes into profit and what doesn't. If they were just talking about overall yield, then the wording of the question would talk about overall yield. This is the other thing. They are not tricky people here. There are never any underhanded tricks in the questions. Like if this was only about plants and yields and stuff like that, then the answers would only talk about plants and yields and stuff. And this statement would only talk about plants and yields. So if you're talking about plants and yields and then suddenly they hit you with profit, then you should absolutely 100% know that you are going to have to bring in something new that has to do with profit. Because they do not trick people. There are 0 trick questions on this ever. It does not happen. So if you have something that looks like a change of subject, it's a change of subject. And you should look for an answer choice accordingly. So, yeah. And there's also, Rose has a good point there too about logical transition words. So, right, because if these factors that they were mentioning were actually making that happen, then you would not use the word nevertheless. So, there you go. Okay. All right. So here's the deal. All right, yeah, so A is the answer that we want. Now, the other thing that you've got to know about these problems is you should know how they use adjectives and stuff. Like here's this answer choice that we just saw. You've got to know how they do this, like, let's talk about this adjective right here. Let's just talk about that for a second. Because, okay, this kind of thing is, a lot of people kind of gloss over that or ignore it. You really can't. I mean, remember, this is not the quant section. They're not going to be making you calculate things. But like when you see qualifiers like this on quantitative stuff, like on words that represent numbers or numerical things in general, I mean, the first thing to know about that is that they're important. The second thing about that is they affect the situation in exactly the same way they would if people use them in a normal conversation. Like, for example, imagine that you were talking about this with someone who actually is a corn farmer, and you were talking about this exact topic of profit per acre, and the farmer was like, well, dude, weed control and living and irrigation cost a lot. You wouldn't make the farmer get into like numbers with you. I mean, you would just know what that meant. You would know that it meant that cost was some super significant fraction of the profit per acre. You just know that. You would know that that's what it meant. And you would know that if you could eliminate that cost or you could mitigate it somehow, then it would absolutely increase profits. Because otherwise, the person would not say it that way. You would know all of that. I mean, it just would be a thing. Here's another. This is another problem that I'm just going to pull up an answer choice from a different problem that we did in one of the other study halls. I'm not going to pull that actual problem up. I'm just going to pull up the answer choice. Because these adjectives are so strong that even looking at an answer choice with them, without even having the context of the problem, should already give you a pretty decent sense. Like this one, like take a look at this answer choice. Without even having a context of the problem, you don't even need it. Just consider that and that. And just imagine any normal conversation that would contain this. So, I mean, you'd be talking to someone who's thinking about buying an electric car because that's why you would be talking about the price of an electric car, right? So imagine a conversation with a potential buyer of an electric car. Sure. And they're like, well, this car is already expensive, and X thing makes it a lot more expensive. I mean, we know what this means, right? Like, what does that mean about that person and their purchasing decision? What does it mean? Just that little snippet of conversation. You had like 100 consumers like that thinking about buying this kind of car. What would that mean they would do? If you want to use big words, you can call them price-sensitive consumers. But yeah, I mean, right? It means they wouldn't buy it. It means they would not buy the car. That's what it means, right? Price-sensitive consumer is like a business PowerPoint double talk way to say it, but they're not going to buy it. Is what you want to take from that. And the reason why they do it, the reason why they do this with adjectives like this is they don't want these things to devolve into quant problems. I mean, they're not trying to be tricky. I mean, really, really get that in your heads. They are not trying to be tricky. they're trying to be as untricky as possible. I mean, they only use qualifiers like this in exactly the same way that people use exactly the same kinds of qualifiers in conversation. I promise you. I promise you they do. But you know, and just think about it, right? If you just imagine hearing, a lot of people underappreciate the importance of this kind of thing. Like if people tack on descriptions like this in a conversation, that's like super significant. I mean, that tells you a lot about the entire context of everything. You know, it tells about everything, right? Like in this kind of context, it tells you about the affordability of the car versus what the consumer has. And it tells you about the attractiveness of it and whether it's considered essential, and it tells you about all of that. Like here, costly tells you a lot about how much this is relative to profit, stuff like that, sure. So like when you see this kind of wording, absolutely you should put a lot of weight on it. Because they're not going to give you math numbers that prove that, because that's not the point of the problem. The point of the problem is just this could be a factor that would make up for that. But yes, you should think about that. All right, let's do another problem. Good. Okay. I mean, yeah, in any of these problems, they are going to add new ideas. That's the whole point. I mean, because again, you know, think about how this stuff works on planet Earth, right? Like if you, let's say you're on a jury, or you're considering buying a product, or you're trying to decide whether your friend is lying about something or anything, right? I mean, any other kind of I'm on the fence type of thing. Like if anyone says, I mean, like, what would make you think X more strongly? Like, what would make a better case for Y? I mean, these are always going to be new outside concepts. I mean, always, right? They have to be. They can't just reintroduce evidence we've already seen. I mean, because the evidence you've already seen is the evidence you've already seen. Right? So these can't be things that are already within the boundaries of what you've already seen. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. What is a PMP exam? I don't know what a PMP exam is. Jack, remember, there's never any tricks, ever. There are no tricks. There are no tricks at all. The words mean what the words say, and they don't mean what they don't say. And they really never lead you down the garden path, unless the garden path is where you are supposed to go. I mean, like, honestly, if you are looking for tricks, then that's the problem right there, right? That you're getting tricked by yourself. I mean, it's like the difference between these two conversations right here. I mean, there's no tricks in this. You just have to think very carefully about what the, umbrella of the discussion is. Like, if this is the discussion, then this is strictly in terms of cause and effect caused by the diet. But if this is a discussion, then it's like every single thing the person does during that period of time. So, yeah. If you have a standard like this, and you see something that is a very obvious fit for it, then about the pull the trigger question, you may as well just pick it and move on. I mean, really, partly that's a personal qualities question. I mean, if you tend to get led astray easily, then once you see this, you should just move on. Absolutely, you should. I mean, because otherwise the answer choices might sing songs and you listen to them. If you tend to be more stubborn about it, then you can read through the other choices just for the reassurance. But if you do tend to listen to the songs and the choices they're singing, then you might be better off not reading the rest of the choices. So, okay. That whole idea of out of scope is not a terribly useful idea, because if you could, I mean, honestly, if you could answer what is out of scope and what isn't, that would mean that you could already solve the problem. So there's not really much fruitfulness to be had there. I mean, that's just sticking labels on things that you already understand. You know, like, not much benefit really to have there. But okay, let's do another problem. Let's do one. How about not this one? The difficulty level is it doesn't matter. No possible benefit of thinking about that at all. Like, literally, that's something you should never, ever think about ever. Okay, remember where the multiple choice answers are found. Alright, I should probably pick an answer to this pretty soon. Okay, still a couple of stragglers. We don't have an answer choice here, but alright, let's take a look. This one, the group did better on, so we can probably get through this somewhat more quickly. But let's talk about it, right? So, see, these problems with blanks, I like these problems because they make people think in the right terms more directly. Like, they make people actually think in terms of how do I fill in the blank, rather than trying to classify the question too much. Right? They make people think about what kind of specific do I need to fill in that blank. So, okay. Anyways, what do we have here? Well, you've got two companies that are ostensibly in the same situation, but you have a policy that saves one of them money but would not save the other one money. So the policy is to do this kind of screening, to do certain tests. Why does it help? Like, why is it good? Well, it discovers stuff that, like, up front, it discovers stuff, what it says in there, finds conditions that lead to very expensive treatment if left untreated. So it can discover stuff with expensive, long-term consequences. Okay. Aha, that's what it does. So this saves Garnet money, but it wouldn't save Renko money. Why not? So the standard that we would need here is why we wouldn't this. Like the standard is we need reason why that policy wouldn't save Renko money, even though it saves Garnet money. That policy, meaning that one. So if you once that's on the table, you can pretty much predict exactly what the answer is going to be. And I mean, in a lot of cases you can. In some cases you can't. I mean, if it's a profit-related problem, you might just be something like, well, it's going to be something random that increases revenue. But in problems like this, you can almost exactly predict what the answer is going to be, like long-term consequences, right? So here, it's reasonable to think that you could predict pretty much exactly what it's going to be, right? That you can predict that it's going to be some form of long-term is important to Garnet, but not to Renko. And that's going to be elephant. So, yep. People stay at Garnet longer. Now, you should still know when you review the problem, you should still be able to eliminate the other choices. I mean, because the other choices should be wrong. Like you're not going to have choices that are good but not as good as the correct answer. I mean, you should definitely have 4 choices that are distinctively wrong answers and 1 choice that is a right answer. It should not be like, you shouldn't have a situation where you've got neck and neck, but this one is better. Like, in other words, you should never have a situation where one of the choices becomes the right answer if you get rid of the right answer. Like, some people in the forum ask that. They're like, if I got rid of the correct answer, which one would be the right answer? I mean, that's the point, right? The point is that nothing should be. All of the other wrong answers should be wrong answers. And it's important to identify that. So, okay. This one, people mostly pick E, not everybody. Yeah, it's very rare for it to be unanimous. There were a couple of non-responders and maybe 7 or 8 people who didn't pick it. But okay, so this one just means that the treatment is not perfect, but that doesn't really affect anything because that's basically what it is, right? It does not entirely eliminate. All they're telling you here is, okay, the treatment isn't perfect. Which is fine, but we're talking about aggregate effects anyway, so those are not affected. So that's problem number 1. Aggregate statistics aren't affected. Also, there's no reason to think of, I mean, this is not a difference between Garnet and Renko. I mean, this is the other thing, right? Like, this is going to seem really obvious when I point it out, but the correct answer has to be a difference between Garnet and Renko. I mean, duh, right? But we need to explain why Renko doesn't benefit from something the same way that Garnet does. So, I mean, one thing that should be an immediate realization, even if you don't understand all of the specifics right away, I mean, I'm talking immediate realization, like less than 2 seconds, is the correct answer must be some kind of difference between the 2 companies. I mean, of course it does. You know, I mean, this is true with anything that needs to explain why 2 entities differ at all, right? Like, why? why did Lindsay really like that concert even though Stephanie didn't? Well, it has to be different between Lindsay and Stephanie, right? Of course it does. It has to be something. So, right. I mean, this should be, before you start picking apart language and stuff like that, you should just look at common sense stuff like this. It's got to be a difference. So, because this alone, I mean, honestly, just that's enough to get rid of. Let's see how much we can get rid of with that. Well, we can get rid of A. We can also get rid of B. I mean, C is a difference. D, we can get rid of D too, because D is not a difference. I mean, D is saying they're the same. So something as obvious as this is already enough to get us down to two choices, which are C and E. So this is a lot easier and more profitable than starting to pick apart the language of the choices. I mean, if we need to explain why Garnet does X and Renko doesn't do X, it's got to be a difference between Garnet and Renko, y'all. I mean, of course it does. So I'll always look for that kind of stuff first before you start, you know, before you get your scalpel out and start doing surgery on words. I mean, look for the big things first. So this one, as far as choice C goes, significantly more employees. So this, as far as having incentives to do this, that's, if they either save money or they don't, and that's not a matter of number of employees. Like whether you save money on this is going to be per employee and not, it's not going to matter, right? There's no reason for us to think that the number of employees matters, because people either get the conditions or they don't. So if there are savings, there will be savings regardless of the number of employees. I mean, if there were some sort of difference based on the number of employees, they would have to spell that out in the passage. Like sometimes you have group health insurance, which is less expensive if you have X number of people, but you can't just make that up. I mean, they would have had to tell you that. You know, if it was like, these prevention programs are way cheaper for larger companies. Okay, well, sure. Then that might matter, because that would change the balance sheet. But you can't just, make that up. So, careful with that. I mean, careful with the whole extreme language thing, because like a lot of things that some people would call extreme language are, like think about this, right? Like a lot of people think that these are extreme language, but this is the kind of extreme language that actually helps answer choices do what they do. I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with language that looks extreme in questions like this. If it all depends on what the task is. I mean, if you get one of those questions where you're trying to prove one of the statements, if it's like which one of these is established by the given information, then extreme is not great. But if it's a question like this, where the whole goal of it is to bring in outside information that helps to establish something, then extreme is totally fine. In fact, it might even help. So just be careful with that. Right. Okay, there are a lot of things happening in the chat here. Let's see. When having more people, there could be more. I mean, James, all of that stuff would scale with the number of people. Like, if you had n number of people, you would have X amount of cost, and if you had 10n number of people, then you would have 10x cost. I mean, like for n number of people, you would have X cost with the program and Y cost without the program. And if you had 10n number of people, you'd have 10x cost with the program and 10y. I mean, if x is less than y, then 10x is still less than 10y is the point. So, and the only way that would change, again, is if you had some sort of giant bulk price break for the group health program, which they would have to tell you that if that was a thing. Okay. All right. I think that covers the comments. All right. Yeah. Yeah. If you there's no. I mean, if you skip the word many years, then yeah. But that's the point. You don't skip the word many years. That's the thing that matters a lot. And you would want to read that part carefully because that part is the whole reason why the policy works. So you wouldn't want to just read that with half attention. Like I'm talking about this comment from the chat box here. Like this. That comment right there. I mean, yeah, if you skip the many years part, yes, you'll get it wrong, but that part is clearly something that's important, at least, to go back and read that, because that sentence is the only sentence that explains the importance of this program. So that sentence explains why the program saves money. So you need to read it carefully. All right. I mean, because that's what it comes down to, right? You have to understand why this policy would not save money for some other company. So you know that you have to understand the exact particulars of why it does save money for the one company. So that means going back and checking that out with total attention. So you're right about that, but it's not. You don't need to pay that much attention to every random sentence, right? You can tell that it matters that you pay attention to that. All right, let's take a look at one more. She's got a qualifier on it, but you're sticking a qualifier on something that doesn't matter. I mean, the number of employees is, because all of those things will scale with the number of employees. So even if you stick a qualifier on that, it still doesn't matter. I mean, I see what you're trying to do here. You're trying to test the waters with some sort of guessing method of, oh, if I see a qualifier, I will pick that answer choice. Don't do that. I mean, there's simple guessing methods will never really win on this test. They're very good at defending against that. But I mean, it's in your conversations, right? If someone says something irrelevant, then sticking qualifiers on it still makes it irrelevant. So, but it's good that you're thinking about that, but the qualifiers only have the effect they do if you're talking about something that is actually relevant. No, it wasn't a guessing method before. It was something that people don't. Sometimes people don't realize the importance that those have when they are in the choices. Like, I think people just sort of think that they're like la 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 vague words, and they don't realize how much functionality they have when they're there. Choice D here. Choice D is a non-difference. Choice D is saying that Renko employees are in the same situation as guided employees. So of course that can't explain anything, right? I mean, this is saying that they are not different. So that's definitely not going to get you anywhere. I mean, this is saying they are not different in this way. I mean, definitely can't explain that difference. All right. So let's do one more of these. Why don't we do this one? And then we can do the other ones in the stack next time. All right, you know where the answer choices are. All right, let's pick a thing here pretty soon. Let's pick a thing. Still have some non-responders. Maybe about 30, 20, 30 more seconds to pick something. Alrighty. Lauren, probably more time than you really need, but yeah, it's point here is the skills development, not the time thing. So time management is really just acknowledging when you're stuck and moving on and picking something when you're stuck. If you do that, you're not going to ever need to worry about minutes and seconds. So should be kind of a non-issue. Okay, let's talk about it. Alrighty. If you're still a non-responder here, you should pick a thing. Let's discuss. All right. Notice again, you don't have to read these things from top to bottom either. I mean, I don't read them from top to bottom. I mean, what I do is I read the thing first, like the bottom conclusion part, just so that I know what the discussion is even about. And then I read the rest of it. Just because, when you're reading a bunch of random facts, you kind of like, why am I reading all these facts? Like think about being on a jury and being presented with evidence. I mean, it's important to know what the case is. Like imagine being shown a bunch of documents and photos and evidence and stuff. And then, after all that is done, they're like, oh, by the way, this is a fraud case. I mean, think about what that whole thing would be like. I mean, the whole time you'd be like, why are you showing me this? What am I supposed to do with that? Like, what am I looking for? Right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, at least, maybe just me, but reading these random facts, I kind of feel disoriented, really. I mean, they want to at least think about reading the conclusion parts first, just so that you have a blessed clue what it is that you're supposed to be thinking about as you read the rest of it, right? Like this is, so we've got, no, I don't. I have a terrible memory. That's the point, right? Like I actually do have a very bad memory. I mean, it's in the first percentile. It's the lowest percentile. I've actually had, brain trauma from my childhood that caused that. But no, it's not modesty. I mean, like I had a head trauma when I was 7 that destroyed a lot of my memory parts of my brain and the 24-hour day parts too. But that's a separate conversation. So this is, my memory is so bad that I have to look at my own ID for my birthday on the worst days. That's actually not a lie. So, which also should tell you something about how much memory you need to do well in the GMAT, i.e., not much. So, in fact, long-term wise, that is, because people with really, really good memories have a much bigger task cut out for them on a test like this, because if you you know, it's not I have a bad memory, but I got an 800. It's actually almost more like I have a bad memory, so I got a perfect 800. I mean, it's the bad memory is much more of an asset here than a liability. I mean, if you think about it, because you can't, like, the number of people who have an amazing memory and who are good at pattern recognition in the whole world is zero. Like, no one is good at both of those things. And I mean, honestly, the people who really have a difficult task cut out for them on this exam are the people who have amazing memories, because those people are not good at pattern recognition and stuff because they never had the need. And the problem is worse if they come from an educational system that emphasizes memory and or a profession, you know, that relies on it. So I mean, those kinds of people are really up against a difficult situation here. But again, side discussion, kind of getting away from the point here. But because I mean, if you do have a better memory, you might be able to retain all of this that you've read, and then when you get to this conclusion, you might be okay. Then you can see what the relevance was. But I mean, there's no way, right? I mean, there's no way that I could retain this stuff long enough to get down here. So, but what you should at least think about doing is you should think about reading this part first, and then, you know, because this is the part that, I mean, yeah, this is the part that gives relevance to everything. I mean, like, same thing, a lot of these problems are about profits and such, and if you have a conclusion about profit, then you immediately know that you should only read the rest and everything else in terms of dollars, cents, cost, revenue, you know, things like that. So if you see, like, this company has been fined repeatedly for dumping stuff into the environment, well, you care about the fines, not the pollution, because profit, right? I mean, you can selectively ignore stuff and not other stuff, and it makes it more efficient, too. Like, if you read this from top to bottom, then, frankly, you have no idea what you are supposed to ignore and what you are supposed to not ignore. And so it's probably going to be a lot less efficient that way. I mean, you know, there's no one-size-fits-all here, and you should really try on a bunch of different kinds of reading and a bunch of different orders, and you should just kind of throw stuff at the wall until something sticks. But you should not feel like you have to read everything in the order that it's given, because that's not very, yeah, just play with it. But consider reading this sort of thing first. So we want to know, so we know that we have some sort of thing that is talking about export oil. So, like, already there are some factors in mind, right? Like, you think about it, there should be some brainstorming that happens here without even reading the other stuff, right? I mean, you can just read this alone and already kind of get at some of this. So we want to know, like, we want to not premature to conclude. So we want a reason why that will not happen. So there's this idea that more oil fields will give more oil exports, and we want this idea to not work. A reason why that won't happen. So without even reading the given facts, I mean, you can kind of already know where this is going. I mean, it's more oil fields are going to give you more oil. So if that means no more export, then it's kind of just a reason not to export the oil. Like, I mean, we know that, right? Just without even having read the rest of the passage yet, and we know that new fields will give new oil. So we need something. We need a reason why we won't export more. So that could mean, more demand inside the country, or maybe, maybe existing oil fields are running out of oil or something. Etc. All right, but this is before we even read the rest of it. Okay, now we have. So for a long time we haven't made new fields, but now, okay. And then this, all right. Economy is getting better, so we are making new oil fields. Okay, sure. So basically this. We need a reason why we will not export more. About that. Yeah, all right. So A is not a thing, right? A is not a change. A is saying that nothing will change. So that doesn't explain anything either way, because A doesn't change the situation at all. B, well, what do we know about cars? Yeah, cars use oil. See, this is the kind of thing I mean by real world connections that you need to make. I mean, this is not, this is not a super obscure genius connection, but cars use oil. I am seeing this problem for the first time, actually. I just kind of pulled it out of an archive that I have. But honestly, any problem I haven't seen in the last 3 or 4 weeks is totally like I'm seeing it for the first time. In fact, it's more like 2 weeks. So, again, memory. Yeah, I mean, so I haven't seen it in the last 2 weeks. It's pretty much like I've never seen it at all. Okay. Yeah, so demand within the country. Sure. There you go. This choice looks good. Yeah, I mean, what else is your country going to do with oil, though? I mean, you refine it. That's not an absurd thing to. That's not an absurd connection to make. Okay. Investment is not what we're dealing with here because we want to know whether we will export oil or not. So money, where the money comes from doesn't matter. And in fact, if the investment is, if people are investing so that they can get oil, then this goes the wrong way, if anything, because they're saying from foreign sources. So this, either this is irrelevant or it goes the wrong way because, this would be more exports, if anything. So either nothing or means more exports if the investment is going to be compensated with oil. If new technology is available to recover oil, then this would be nice, although this doesn't have anything to do with the new fields. Also, so first of all, it has nothing to do with the new fields, but also, the thing about this choice is, this is going to push up supply even more. So, if anything, that's going to push towards more exports. Because this is a surplus of oil. I mean, this is not only does this not give us a reason to think that we will not export this oil, but this just throws more oil into the equation. So this makes it even more likely that we will export oil. This would be a wrong way. And then this one, the productivity, not so much of an issue, because as long as they have any productivity at all, then we're still there. I mean, like the actual productivity, actual amount of productivity isn't the issue, as long as it's not zero. So there you go. I mean, so the thing is, I mean, when you think about connections like this one, first of all, you got to think about the reasonableness of the connections, and the other thing that these problems feature is the wrong answers are so wrong that you'll be fine, you know. I mean, the wrong answers are so completely wrong that these kinds of things should be non-issues. You know, like for example, here in this problem, we have something that is a non-change. We have a wrong way answer, we have a wrong way answer, and we have a non-factor. So if you have like non-factor, wrong way, non-factor, and then, oh, I don't know if we can, you know, I don't know if refining can be factored in there. I mean, you know, like that's kind of like saying we have black, and very light gray, where you want white. You know, it's still very clear which one is the right answer, even if you thought this was an issue of some kind. It's you can tell because the wrong answers are so wrong, right? Oh no, we're like 8 minutes over time. I just realized, so I don't have time to do anything after the study hall except say goodbye and run. But all right. As far as what if the new cars are not dependent on fossil fuels, I mean, we got to be realistic here. There's nowhere in the world where people drive a majority of cars that are not oil-based. So you can't make up science fiction here. It's not a thing. I mean, this is planet Earth. It's important to realize that. I mean, yeah. Okay. All right. Let's kill it. Thanks, everybody. Did not realize it was overtime by so much. Good afternoon, good evening, good night. Thanks, good to run. We got a couple more of these problems for next time, so the next study hall is probably going to be more of these problems. But, all right, thanks very much, and until next time.